Hi, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we're reading from Robin Hood, starting with Chapter 20. Robin Hood sells pots in Nottingham Town. For a long time after the widow's sons were rescued from the hands of the sheriff, Robin Hood and his men never went near Nottingham Town. They moved to a distant part of the great forest and kept far out of the way of the strong force which the sheriff raised to search their old haunts. But one fine morning, when the birds were singing and the sun was shining and the green leaves fluttering in a pleasant breeze, Robin Hood, with a band of his followers, stood in a brake watching the road which ran through the forest. Robin was thinking of Nottingham Town and how he would like to enter the walls and listen to the merry gossip of the marketplace when a figure appeared in the distance. It was a potter, seated in his cart and driving quietly along the way. "This potter is a proud fellow," said Robin to his men. "He comes marching through our forest, and yet has never paid a single penny of passage money." Said Little John. "He's rather an awkward fellow to deal with. I once had a turn with him, and he hit me 3 such blows that my sides ached for days. I'll wager 40 shillings that there is not a man among us can stop him." Pardon me. "I'll take your wager," said Robin. "Stand here, my lads, and I will soon stop this saucy potter." On jogged the potter's cart, the pots clattering together, and the driver whistling a blithe strain, and out went Robin to meet the potter, a big burly fellow with a red face. Robin Hood seized the horse by the head and bade the potter stand. "What is thy will, fellow?" cried the potter shortly, springing down from his seat. "All these 3 years and more, potter," said Robin. "Thou hast haunted this way, yet wert thou never so courteous a man, 1 penny of toll to pay." "What is your name?" said the potter, "and why under the sun should I pay toll to you?" "I am Robin Hood," said the outlaw, "and thou shalt leave me a pledge this day." "I will leave no pledge, and I will pay no toll," said the potter sturdily. "Let go my horse, I say." When the potter saw that Robin still kept his hold on the horse, he ran to the cart and fetched out a great quarterstaff. Robin whipped out his sword and raised his buckler, and the men in ambush looked out eagerly to watch the encounter. "Yonder potter will make a stiff stand of it," said Little John to his companions, and the words were scarce out of his mouth when they saw a very clever piece of cudgel play. The potter made a spring at Robin, as if to deliver a swinging blow at his head, and when Robin raised his buckler to ward the stroke, the potter made the staff twirl in his hands like a mill wheel, and delivered a backhanded blow which sent the outlaw's buckler clattering to the ground. Robin bent to pick up his buckler, for he did not dream that the potter could fetch another blow before the buckler was safely in his hands, but the potter was as quick as lightning. Down whirled the staff again, caught Robin across the neck, and sent him headlong to the ground. When the men in hiding saw this, they ran forward, Little John shouting, "Let us help our master, or else yonder potter will slay him." When the potter saw the outlaws rushing forward, he stepped back and poised his great staff ready to defend himself. Robin Hood sat up and began to rub his sore neck. "Well, master," said Little John, "shall I have your 40 shillings, or will you have mine?" "If the wager had been for 100 shillings," replied Robin, "they had been all thine." "It is full little courtesy, as I have heard wise men say," cried the potter, "to hinder a poor yeoman on his journey when he comes driving over the way." "You speak truth, potter," replied Robin, "and thou art a stout yeoman, and if thou shouldst drive forth every day, thou shalt never again be hindered by me. Come, join our fellowship. Give me your clothing, and I will give you mine, and will go to Nottingham in your place." "Master, master," cried Little John, "have a care. What are you thinking of? You know very well that Nottingham is no place for you. Beware of the sheriff. If he once knew you were in the town, you were as good as a dead man at once." "For all that my mind is made up to go," replied the leader. "The sheriff shall never discover me, I warrant you. I will sell my pots under his very nose. The boldest way is always the safest." When his followers saw that Robin was resolved to go, they gave over dissuading him, and one ran to fetch Friar Tuck, who was very clever at disguising a man. The friar came and made Robin look as different from his usual self as if he had been transformed by a fairy. Robin's face was stained with the juices of herbs till he was browner than a gypsy. His hair and beard were dressed in a different fashion from his usual way of combing them. A big patch was fastened over one eye. I apologize. A big patch was fastened over one eye, and when Friar Tuck had finished with him, Maid Marian herself would not have known her Robin. When he was ready to start, Robin took the reins and drove the potter's cart down the road, and the potter stayed with the yeoman, who took good care of him and made him very comfortable among them. Singing as he went, Robin soon came to Nottingham, where he stabled his horse and gave him a feed of oats and hay. Next, Robin took his pots and marched boldly to a stand within sight of the sheriff's windows. "Pots, pots," he cried in a loud, merry voice. "Pots and pans, good and cheap. Who'll buy? Who'll buy?" His ringing tones soon brought a group of women about him, and they asked the price of his pots. When he replied, they stared in wonder, for he asked 3 pence for a pot well worth 5 pence, and in a few moments he was selling pots as fast as he could hand them out. "This is a queer fellow," said the women of the town. "He is selling his pots at about half the usual price. It is plain he does not know much about his trade, but it is a lucky chance for us, and we will buy while we may." When the news spread that there was a strange potter selling pots at half price, a crowd of people gathered round the cart, and there was so much commotion that the sheriff's wife came to the window to see what the concourse meant. Robin had been waiting for this, and had been keeping back some of the finest pots on purpose. There were only 5 left, and these he sent at once to the sheriff's wife, asking her to accept them as a present from a potter on his first visit to the town over which her husband ruled. The sheriff's wife was pleased with the fine pots, and came herself to thank Robin for them. And she was so pleased with Robin's politeness and good manners that she invited him to dine with herself and the sheriff, and Robin accepted the invitation at once. In the hall, Robin and the sheriff met, and the potter bowed low to the great man. "Look what the potter has given you and me," cried the sheriff's wife. 5 fine pots, just the things I stood in need of." "He is full welcome," said the sheriff. "Let us wash and go to meat." Now, as they sat at dinner, there arose a talk of a great shooting match that was to take place the same afternoon, and the prize for the winner would be 40 shillings. "A good prize," said the potter, and to himself he said, "As I am a true Christian man, that shooting will I see." When they had enjoyed a capital dinner, all the company went to the butts to see the sheriff's men shoot for the 40 shillings. As the prize was a good one, the butts were set up at a good distance from the shooting point in order to test the mettle of the archers. One after another, the sheriff's men loosed their arrows at the mark, but the test was too severe, and not one of them got within half a bow's length of the center of the target. "What dost thou think of the shooting, potter?" cried the sheriff. The potter smiled. "I would I had a bow," he said. "Then I would show you how we shoot where I come from." "And a bow thou shalt have," cried the sheriff. "Thou dost look a stalwart fellow, and shall make trial of thy skill. 3 bows shall be brought, that thou mayest choose the best." The sheriff commanded a yeoman to fetch some bows, and when they were brought, the potter looked them over carefully. "This is the best," said the potter, and bent a string to it and drew it. "But it is not of much account after all," he added. "This is but right weak gear, Master Sheriff. Where I come from, men can bend a bow twice as stiff as this. Natheless, I will make trial of it." The potter now chose an arrow with care and placed it on the string. Then he drew the bow and loosed the shaft without dwelling for an instant on his aim. "Aye, the clout! Aye, the clout!" shouted the bystanders. "Well shot! Good bow!" To the surprise of all, the potter's arrow stood quivering in the very center of the target. "Shoot again, my men," cried the sheriff. "What one has done, others should do, and they call themselves good bowmen." The sheriff's men shot round again, and the potter shot with them. Not one of the men hit the target, but when the potter's turn came, he sent an arrow which lighted on the first arrow and cleft it into 3. The sheriff's men looked darkly and angrily on the potter, for they felt great shame at being beaten so thoroughly by a stranger. But the sheriff laughed loudly when he saw his guest bear away the mastery, and cried, "Potter, thou art a man, and art worthy to bear a bow in whatever place thou goest." "I would shoot better still," said the potter, "if I had the bow which lies in my cart." "Is it a bow of special worth?" asked the sheriff. "Aye, faith it is," replied the potter. "Why, I had it from Robin Hood himself." You may be sure that the sheriff pricked up his ears when he heard the potter mention the name of his arch-enemy. "Knowest thou Robin Hood?" demanded the sheriff. "Potter, art thou one of his followers?" "That am I not, Sir Sheriff," replied the potter. A follower of Robin Hood was I never in my life." "How comest thou, then, to know him?" "Why, I travel through his country, and he has a friendship for me, and I am safe from his men. He loves, too, to try my skill in archery, and 100 times have I shot with him under the gnarled oaks of the forest." "I would give 100 pounds," cried the sheriff. "Yes, 100 golden pounds, if that false outlaw stood as near to me as thou dost this day." "How now, Sir Sheriff?" said the potter. "Why this heat against Robin Hood? Surely he hath not dared to raise his hand against the power and dignity of the Sheriff of Nottingham." "Hath he not, the villain?" cried the sheriff. "But in sooth he hath done me great despite. My silver, ring, and money hath he purloined, and my bones hath he made sore, sleeping as I was forced to do on the gnarled and knobby roots of trees. The potter seemed astonished and grieved to hear of such enormities, and the sheriff poured the tale of woes into these sympathetic ears. He ought to be seized and dragged into Nottingham by the ears, declared the potter, and it is a strange thing, but I can tell you the very spot where you might lay hands on him tomorrow. Thou wouldst do me a great service, and rid the country of a stout rogue if I could seize him by thy aid, said the sheriff. It could be done, said the potter, and looked craftily at the sheriff. But for such a deed there should be good reward, Sir Sheriff. Fear not for that, hastily replied the sheriff. Only put him in my hands, and I will pay thee gladly the £100. It is a bargain, cried the potter, and smacked his thigh. Tomorrow, within 3 hours of prime, I will set you within full sight of Robin Hood. Ay, but not with a score of his rogues about him, put in the sheriff. With not one about him, cried the potter. I happen to have learned all his plans for tomorrow, and you shall meet him quite alone. Good, said the sheriff. I will requite thee as I have promised, never fear, and home they went to supper. The next morning the potter and the sheriff started early for the forest. The latter was attended only by a couple of strong fellows, for he did not wish to arouse attention by a display of great force, and he felt certain that the 3 of them would be in ample strength to deal with a man taken by surprise. When the potter took leave of the sheriff's wife, he bowed low before her and thanked her for the good cheer she had spread before him. Dame, said he, I pray you wear this in memory of me, and he gave her a beautiful gold ring. Gramercy, good sir, said the sheriff's wife, I am much beholden to you for this handsome gift, and so the potter and the lady parted the best of friends. For nearly 2 hours the potter drove his cart along the forest road, and the sheriff and his men trotted behind on horseback. Then they came to a place where 4 woodland paths met, and the potter drew rein. Here is the spot where you may meet with Robin Hood, he said. The sheriff and his men looked uneasily round. It had seemed simple enough in the city to think of going out and seizing Robin Hood, but here, amid the solemn silence of the mighty forest, the name of the great outlaw seemed to have a different ring about it, and to become a name of dread and fear. I see no sign of Robin Hood, said the sheriff, and looked over each shoulder in turn, as if fearing that Robin Hood might spring out of the earth behind him. No, but you soon will, said the potter in a low, mysterious voice. Hide yourselves in this brake, and take your swords in your hands. I will watch for him, and when he is close at hand, I will sound my horn. Then do you rush boldly forward and seize him. After that, I shall claim the promised reward. It is ready for thee, said the sheriff, and patted the bag of money tucked under his cloak. The potter left the sheriff and his men hidden in the thicket, and went a short distance farther to an open space where a spring of water bubbled up at the foot of a rock and ran away from the glade. Here he washed the stain from his face and hands, and cast away his disguise, save for the potter's clothes. Then he raised his horn to his lips, blew 3 sharp blasts, and slipped behind a great oak which hid him completely. In a moment 2 parties burst into the glade. From the one hand, the sheriff and his men dashed through the bushes, sword in hand, ready to spring upon Robin Hood. From the other, Little John, Much, Will Scarlet, and a dozen more burst into the glade to answer their master's call. Robin Hood watched the meeting from cover of the great trunk and smiled. In truth, one might well smile to see the sheriff and his men when they came face to face with the stout band of outlaws. Excuse me. Their mouths opened, their swords fell from their hands. They turned to flee, when a shout from Little John gave them pause. Stand, shouted the giant, or we will stick ye as full of shafts as a boar is of bristles. This fearsome threat fixed the 3 to the earth, and they looked upon Little John and his companions with faces full of dread. What make ye here? Cried the giant, and who sounded Robin Hood's horn? Robin Hood's horn? Faltered the sheriff. Nay, good yeoman, I know not of Robin Hood's horn. Ye mistake. 'Twas only a potter who was with us, but now and sounded the blast. Tell me no tales of potters, cried Little John, apparently in great anger, though he began to scent his leader's trick. No potter blew those notes. 'Twas none but the Prince of Outlaws, Robin Hood himself. Hast thou done aught wrong to him? If so, 100 deaths were all too little for ye to suffer. The outlaws seconded Little John's threat with a wild shout and shook their bows in the air. Death to him who molests Robin Hood, they roared. The sheriff trembled from head to foot. Potter, Potter, he cried. Where art thou? Show thyself, Potter. Here am I, sheriff, cried a well-known voice, and the potter stepped from the thicket whence he had been watching the play in high glee. The sheriff stood stiff with terror, for naught was left now of the potter but his garb. The face was the face of Robin Hood, and the sheriff knew it and trembled more than ever. Potter, Potter, he stammered, thou hast played me false. Nay, nay, Sheriff, laughed Robin, say not so. I have kept my word like a true man and an Englishman. Did I not promise thou shouldst meet Robin Hood? And I have carried out that same promise. Ah, growled the sheriff, had I but known of this in Nottingham, ye had never seen the fair forest again, Master Potter. That I know very well, laughed Robin. But fear not, Sheriff, I will not hurt a hair of your head, and all for the sake of your good wife who is kind to me. On hearing this, the sheriff plucked up his spirit at once, for he knew that Robin was a man of his word. At this moment, Little John broke in. Well, master, said the big fellow, how did you fare in Nottingham? Did you sell your ware? Every piece of it, Little John, replied Robin, and 5 pots of it the sheriff had, and he has brought the money to pay for them in a bag under his cloak. The bag, Sir Sheriff, roared the giant, and the sheriff, pulling a wry face, had to give up the 100 pounds he had thought to pay for the capture of Robin Hood. He came on a horse. He shall go back on foot, said Robin, and in a trice the sheriff and his men were stripped of all their gear. Then Robin commanded that a white palfrey should be brought to the place, and a yeoman ran and fetched the animal. Now, Sheriff, said Robin, off with you at once, and you shall lead this white palfrey home, and tell your wife that Robin Hood sends it to her with his respects. For her sake you shall go free. Had she not been so kind to me, you should have had a worse time of it than this in the forest. The sheriff slunk away, only too glad to find himself on the way with sound bones in his body, and trudged briskly along until he came to the town and his house. At the very door he met his wife, who had been watching from the window and had run to meet him. How have you fared in the Green Forest? She cried. And have you brought Robin home? Where is he? Let me see him. Dame, roared the sheriff, never say that name again in my hearing. Ye have seen the rogue truly enough. I, cried the sheriff's wife in wonder, never have I set eyes on him. Truly thou hast, shouted the angry sheriff. 'Twas the potter. The rascal who pretended to sell pots was none other than Robin Hood himself. And when he had drawn me into the forest, he robbed me of my gold, my horses, my gear, and has sent me empty back save for this white palfrey that he hath given to thee. She cried out in amazement to hear this strange news, and then she said, Well, you have paid now for all the pots that Robin gave me. Aye, that I have, dame, groaned the sheriff. I have paid right heavily, and he dragged himself wearily into the house, full of anger to think that Robin had tricked him cleverly once more. When Robin had started the sheriff back to Nottingham, he summoned the true Potter before him and said, Potter, what were those pots worth that I took to Nottingham? 2 nobles, cried the Potter promptly. That is what I would have made of them had I been there. Here is 10 pounds in thy hand, said Robin. I have sold them at a great price, and thou shalt have thy share. And whenever thou dost pass this way, Potter, remember thou art always welcome in the greenwood. Thanks, noble Robin, cried the Potter. Would that I could meet with such a sale for my pots every day of the year. Thus parted Robin, the sheriff, and the Potter. As he left the scene, the Potter exclaimed, Heaven have mercy on Robin Hood's soul and guard all good yeomen. We'll stop there for today and start tomorrow with chapter 21. Thank you. Bye-bye.